for having me. My talk is going to be short, and it's also probably going to be a little bit ill-informed. And by ill-informed, I really mean I'm not an expert on publishing. I'm really here just to talk about my own personal experience with open access publishing and what I got out of it as a researcher, and maybe, a little bit about what I think people in general more broadly might get from open access publishing as a conduit, as a venue for sharing their research. So I published an article with a journal called the Comics Grid in 2020. And the article is entitled, very in keeping with the kind of stuff I do, Bleeding Panels, Leaking Forms, Reading the Abject in Emily Carroll's Through the Woods. So it was an article about representations of girlhood and puberty in a horror comic series called Through the Woods. So that's my area of interest, or one of them anyway. And I guess when I was looking for somewhere to publish my article, initially, open access was quite low on my list. It's not something I thought about initially. It's not something that really it didn't factor into my decision to publish with this particular journal. At least initially, I've kind of changed my mind on it, or not even changed my mind, but I guess started paying more attention to the issue of open access since I published with this particular journal. So I went with this journal firstly because it focuses on comics and graphic narratives as both a literary and artistic medium, and it foregrounds comic studies as an emerging discipline. It encourages the exploration of relevant theoretical paradigms, but with a focus on accessibility. So it encourages the incorporation and the use of kind of cutting edge theory, but in an accessible manner. So using that theory in an accessible way. The other reason that I went with this particular journal is that it really encourages the use of images in articles, and it really encourages the close reading of images. So as someone who studies comics as a literary and artistic form, it was important to me that I had the space to engage obviously in close reading of the text, but also in close reading of the images. So this particular journal is able to host like high quality copies, high quality uploads or scans of images, and it really facilitates sort of close, careful engagement with the images. So with the kind of the visual component of comics as a medium. And as I said, open access, the fact that it was open access was initially kind of low on my list of priorities. It's not really something that I had in mind. I wanted to go with a journal that was relevant to my area of interest, that approached that topic in a way that I sort of, that I felt was appropriate. And also, that this is 4 years ago now. I was obviously still quite early on in my academic career. And so I was just eager to get my work out there and get my work published. So I didn't really give a huge amount of consideration to the fact that this journal was open access. However, kind of once I started reconsidering it, I started to think a little bit about the journal's commitment to open access as a kind of democratization of knowledge. And this is something that I guess I learned more about after I published with them. So they explain in their about section, in their kind of their mission statement, they say this journal provides immediate access to its content on the principle that making research freely available to the public supports a greater global exchange of knowledge. So the fact that this was part of their ethos, open access is part of their ethos, I felt that was quite important. And sort of the more I thought about it, especially since at that time when I submitted this article, I was in the early stages of my career. I was precariously employed. I was, I think, on a 2-year contract at that point. The idea of an open access journal kind of, I guess, began to speak to me a little bit more, because I'm sure, as many of you are aware, and I'm sure this has been the experience for many of you, there is a crisis of precarity within academia. A lot of people, when they finish their PhDs in the early stages of their career, they're employed on temporary precarious contracts where they might work, 9 months in one place, a year in another place, maybe 6 months in another place. There's a lot of movement around between institutions. There might also be periods of unemployment, or at least not being employed in the academic sector between working in different institutions. And an issue with that, of course, is that when people aren't associated or aren't affiliated with academic institutions, they don't always have access to certain journals and resources if those journals aren't open access. So they don't always have access to the databases that they need. So I think for me, as someone who was, precarious when I published this article and who's only recently gotten out of being in a precarious position, the idea of open access is really important, because it means that knowledge, information isn't just limited to those who are embedded in the academy, who are just affiliated with a university. It means that a wide range of people can access, the research and the materials. This particular journal, the Comics Grid, it uses the Creative Commons license BY40, which means that others may reuse the work on condition that it's properly cited. So kind of knowing exactly what kind of Creative Commons license is used there is really helpful. So as I said, the benefits to, sorry, that's some of the creepy stuff I work on, so apologies for the creepiness. So anyone anywhere can access the article, and they can read my work with no financial or technological restrictions. You don't need to have access to JSTOR or Muse or any databases. You can just access this particular journal through your web browser. You can probably access it on your phone. It's just anyone really can access it. And this, as I said, it means that there's an equality, there's equity when it comes to access and freedom of information. Anyone can read this article and the other articles on this journal, regardless of their institutional affiliation or employment status or anything else. And this, of course, broadens the scope of who can read my work beyond just academics. It means that, for example, writers, critics, people who are just fans of this particular comic can go and read my article. And one of the other things I do, in addition to my regular sort of academic job, I occasionally do like DVD commentaries and things like that, because I work in the area of horror and the Gothic. So sometimes I get to do little DVD commentaries and video essays on horror movies and things that I study. And I have a lot of friends who work in that area who are not affiliated with universities, but they do work as freelance writers or film historians. And again, one of the big bugbears for them when they're researching a project like a commentary or a video essay is that they don't always have access to the articles they need, because if it's on JSTOR, if they're not affiliated with the university, they can't get that article. So it's really, really useful for people in a wide range of fields across kind of the creative industries. They can access that. For me personally, it's my most cited work, at least according to Google Scholar. It has, when I last checked, it had 4,517 views and 731 downloads, which is probably much more than anything else I've written. Certainly, when it comes to academic books, those often tend to be expensive. Not as many people are going to be accessing things like monographs that I've written, because again, the pricing is often prohibitive unless it's through a library. So way more people have read this than probably anything else I've ever done. And as a result, it really helps to forge scholarly connections and community. So, that's just kind of personally for me what was beneficial. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I don't want to take up too much time, because I know you're probably on a bit of a schedule.